Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a really fascinating set of sources you've pulled together for us today. It takes us deep into the world of enormous global wealth, sometimes quite hidden wealth.
Yeah, it really covers the gamut. Everything from, the big digital monopolies that are shaping things right now to the old industrial giants, and then into the really murky stuff at global finance, the secrecy.
And that's our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? To try and find the common threads. How do these empires get built? What are the sort of hidden systems that let the wealthy operate with so much power, and sometimes, it seems, without facing the consequences?
Exactly. It's less about just the sheer size of the fortunes, which is staggering, and more about the mechanisms, the hidden rules, the structures they use,
Yeah.
how they get to operate with, well, what looks like impunity.
So today we're diving into how those rules get written, or maybe bent, to favor the people at the top. We'll look at how technology, like AI, is concentrating power, how financial games are played across borders, and what happens when scandal pulls back the curtain.
Right. And maybe we should start with the big structural forces today, the technology and the economics.
Makes sense. Let's kick off with AI, artificial intelligence. One of the sources, Kai-Fu Lee, has this really useful framing. He calls this the age of implementation. What does he mean by that?
Well, it's a key distinction. He's saying we're not really in an age of fundamental AI breakthroughs, like creating a truly conscious machine or anything like that. Not general AI.
Okay.
Instead, it's about applying the deep learning technology we already have, taking its power, especially in pattern recognition, and just putting it to work.
Applying it where, specifically?
Everywhere, really. Diagnosing diseases from scans, maybe better than a doctor. Pricing insurance policies with incredible precision. Optimizing logistics. Driving cars eventually. Anything complex, data-heavy, where finding patterns gives you an edge.
And the companies that figure out that application first, they get a massive advantage.
A huge advantage.
Yeah.
Because that leads directly to what Lee calls the AI inequality machine. It creates this winner-take-all dynamic.
How does that work? What's the mechanism there? Why does AI naturally lead to monopolies?
It really comes down to data. Think about it. The first company to get traction in a market, say ride-sharing, gets the most users.
Right. Collects the most data points. Trips, routes, times.
Exactly. And that mountain of data lets them train a better AI, a smarter algorithm for pricing, for dispatching drivers, whatever.
Which attracts more users because the service is better or cheaper.
Precisely. And those new users generate even more data. It's a feedback loop. Better AI, more users, more data, even better AI. It just snowballs. And that makes it incredibly hard for anyone else to catch up.
So you end up with one or two dominant players in dozens of different industries.
Winner take all, or winner take most anyway. And this feeds directly into another big trend, the great decoupling.
That's the gap between productivity going up, companies making more stuff more efficiently, but wages for average workers staying flat or even falling.
That's the one. AI just pours fuel on that fire. It creates this split in the job market. You have the high-skilled people designing and managing the AI systems.
Big salaries there.
Right. And then you have lower-wage service jobs that AI can't easily do yet. But what about the jobs in the middle?
The truck drivers, the paralegals, maybe some analysts. Jobs based on tasks that AI can learn to recognize patterns in.
They get squeezed. Lee's warning is pretty stark. If we don't manage this, AI will rip wide open that gap between productivity and wages. The wealth generated just won't flow down.
And this isn't just happening within, say, the US or China. It's a global competition, but with different strategies.
Yeah, this is interesting. You see a difference between how Silicon Valley often expands
Yeah.
and how the big Chinese tech firms do it.
Silicon Valley, like Uber or Amazon, tends to just roll into a new country with their existing product, right?
Yeah.
Try to dominate directly.
That's often the model, yeah. Let's call it the conquest model.
Yeah.
Plant the flag, take the market.
But the Chinese companies like Didi in ride-sharing or Alibaba in e-commerce, they do it differently.
Often, yes. Their approach, especially in developing countries, is more about strategic investment. They'll find promising local startups and pour money and tech expertise into them.
Partnering rather than conquering.
Kind of.
Yeah.
It helps them navigate local rules, local tastes. It's maybe a bit more subtle, less visible to us in the West, but potentially very effective long term. Either way, conquest or partnership, you're seeing AI drive this global concentration of economic power.
Okay, so that's the cutting edge, the AI-driven future of concentration. But one of our other key sources, Thomas Piketty, reminds us that extreme wealth concentration, well, it has deep historical roots.
Absolutely essential context. It's easy to think this is all brand new, but Piketty shows us, look, back in the U.S. around 1910, things were already incredibly concentrated.
How concentrated?
Well, the richest 10%, the top decile, owned something like 80% of all wealth in the country.
80%. Wow.
And the top 1%, the super elite, they held about 45%. Now, this was actually less unequal than old Europe at the time with its landed aristocracy.
But still, figures like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, their fortunes were so vast, it actually worried people back then.
It did, because, part of the American idea was that it wasn't like Europe. It was supposed to be the land of opportunity, less rigid, less hierarchical. Seeing these Gilded Age fortunes pile up felt like a betrayal of that promise. It was a real source of national anxiety.
And Piketty has that incredibly simple, powerful formula to explain why wealth concentrates historically. RG.
Yes, we really need to unpack that for you, the listener, because it's fundamental.
Exactly. Break it down. R.
R is the rate of return on capital. Basically, how fast wealth grows on its own. Think profits from businesses, dividends from stocks, rent from properties, interest.
Money making money.
Exactly. And G.
That's the growth rate of the overall economy, right? Like the growth in national income, wages, overall output.
Correct. So when the return on existing wealth is consistently higher than G, the growth of the economy that benefits most people through wages, what happens?
Wealth owned by the few grows faster than the income earned by the many.
Precisely. If you inherit a fortune, or just have a lot of capital invested, your wealth automatically compounds faster than the economy is growing. It pulls away. Over generations, this mathematically leads to wealth becoming more and more concentrated at the very top.
It explains how inherited wealth can become so dominant.
It's the key mechanism. Now, Piketty adds a bit of nuance for today. He suggests that even if we got rid of all taxes on capital, maybe wealth wouldn't instantly snap back to those extreme 1910 levels.
Oh, why not?
Partly because the gap between R and G might be a bit smaller now than it was back then, or during long periods of history before industrialization when growth G was basically zero.
But the fundamental dynamic is still there if R stays above G.
The tendency is absolutely still there. As long as capital earns more than the economy grows, the natural flow is towards concentration. Whether it's old money compounding over centuries or new AI fortunes exploding upwards, the underlying principle often holds.
So, the structure itself, historically and technologically, seems tilted towards accumulation at the top, which brings us to how that accumulated wealth is managed, protected, and sometimes hidden.
Right. Which takes us into Section 2, the world of financial deception, opaque structures, and hidden empires.
Yeah.
Because impunity often relies on secrecy.
Let's start with that global view again. Joe Studwell talks about the Asian godfathers and the culture of secrecy there.
Yeah, he points out that deal makers in Asia often defend their intense secrecy by saying, oh, that's just Asian culture, or that's Chinese culture.
But Studwell says that's convenient.
He argues it's basically a smokescreen. His point is, secrecy and powerful deal makers go hand in hand everywhere. It's not unique to Asia. It's a universal tool when you're moving massive amounts of capital and trying to avoid scrutiny.
And he uses a great example from the heart of Western finance to prove it.
He does. Think about the most powerful old private banks like J.P. Morgan in New York or Rothschild in London back at the turn of the 20th century. J.P. Morgan's headquarters on Wall Street. It didn't have a big brass nameplate outside. It just had the number 23 on the door.
Just the number.
That's it. If you were important enough to be doing business there, you knew what 23 meant. If you weren't, well, it kept you guessing. It was about projecting power through deliberate obscurity.
And that kind of opacity, that secrecy, allows for something more damaging, what Studwell calls policy capture.
This is critical. He gives examples from places like Indonesia and the Philippines, where government programs were set up, supposedly, to help local businesses grow.
Like creating an indigenous entrepreneurial class.
That was the stated goal, but what actually happened? Politically connected tycoons basically hijacked these programs. Instead of using the support to build factories or, actually manufacture things, they became what Studwell calls license brokers and political fixers. Their skill wasn't in business. It was in getting cozy with politicians, securing valuable import licenses, and manipulating the rules like credit limits to make sure they got the benefits, while genuine small businesses were starved of capital.
So the system actively rewarded political connections over actual enterprise.
Exactly. It's classic cronyism, hidden behind the veneer of a development program. And you see echoes of that kind of ruthlessness, that use of power and connection, even in supposedly open markets like Wall Street.
Let's talk about Steve Cohen and SA Capital. The sources describe a kind of cold shoulder tactic he used.
Yeah, this story really illustrates the raw power dynamics. SAC was a huge source of trading commissions for the big Wall Street banks. They made the banks a lot of money.
Okay.
So when Cohen apparently decided he didn't like a competitor, a trader named Kenny Lissack, and didn't want the banks dealing with him, well, things changed fast for Lissack.
What happened? Did Cohen tell the banks directly?
It seems it was more subtle, but the message got through loud and clear. Other Wall Street firms suddenly became unwilling to do business with Lissack
Why?
because they couldn't afford to alienate Steve Cohen. Keeping Seaside's business, worth millions in commissions, was far more important than maintaining a relationship with one trader Cohen didn't like. It was a demonstration of power fall in line, or risk being frozen out by the whole street.
A kind of enforced loyalty through economic clout. And speaking of Wall Street, information is obviously key, but so is speed. Michael Lewis's work on high-frequency trading, HFT, that reveals another layer of exploitation, right?
Absolutely. HFT uses microscopic speed advantages to essentially skim profits from other investors, even when prices look stable.
How does that work, especially in those dark pools you hear about?
Right, so dark pools are private exchanges, usually run by big banks, where large institutions trade big blocks of stock away from the public market to avoid moving the price too much.
Okay, seems legitimate. So where does HFT come in?
HFT firms use their superior technology, we're talking connections measured in millions of a second, to see buy and sell orders going into these dark pools fractionally faster than anyone else.
So they see someone wants to buy at, say, $10.01, and someone else wants to sell at $9.99.
Exactly. And the HFT firm, being faster, can jump in between. They buy at $9.99 and immediately sell at $10.01, capturing that 2-cent spread. Or sometimes they facilitate the trade right in the middle at $10, taking a penny.
Seems like tiny amounts.
It is, per trade.
Oh.
But they do this millions, maybe billions of times a day across all stocks. It adds up to enormous profits, extracted purely through a speed advantage. It's like they're inserting themselves as a tiny, ultra-fast toll booth on every transaction.
And Lewis points out that the HFT firms actually capture most of the profit from this.
Yeah, the numbers are pretty startling. In this dark pool arbitrage game, the HFT firms might capture something like 85% of the potential profit, leaving the banks who actually run the dark pools with only 15%.
So the tech advantage is that strong.
It leads to this almost nihilistic view from some insiders.
Mm-hmm.
One programmer, Lewis, quotes, basically shrugged it off as it's all one big gamble one way or another. Fairness or fiduciary duty doesn't really enter the equation when speed is everything.
Okay, shifting from financial speed to political maneuvering. Jane Mayer's work on Koch Industries highlights a fascinating, maybe hypocritical dynamic.
Definitely. Koch Industries has spent millions, maybe billions, building this public image as fierce champions of the free market, constantly railing against government intervention and crony capitalism.
But Mayer shows they're simultaneously taking advantage of government programs themselves.
Absolutely. It's a stark contrast. For example, their huge cattle ranches graze herds on federal land,
Okay.
and they benefit from artificially low grazing fees set by the government. That's a direct subsidy paid for by taxpayers.
Right. What else?
Well, there was the deal they secured under the Bush administration to sell large amounts of crude oil to fill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
The SPR, the government's emergency oil stockpile. How is that not government intervention in the market?
Exactly. It's arguably the opposite of a free market. It's the government deliberately buying oil to manage supply and prices for national security reasons. Even a former Koch executive, quoted in the source, called it maybe the most anti-free market tool imaginable. Yet, Koch Industries profited from it while funding think tanks and campaigns arguing against exactly that kind of government action.
So public stance versus private benefit.
It seems to be a pattern. And this aggressiveness isn't just about getting subsidies, it's also about protecting their core interests, particularly in fossil fuels, by trying to silence inconvenient science.
You mean attacking climate scientists?
Yes. The sources describe the fossil fuel industry, which one scientist calls an oligarchy, as launching these incredibly ferocious, often personal attacks against climate scientists whose research threatens their business model. The goal isn't scientific debate, it's to create doubt, muddy the waters, and delay action, regardless of the evidence. Protecting the capital comes first.
It's interesting, though, to contrast that kind of political self-interest with someone like Andrew Carnegie. After he made his fortune, he used his influence differently.
Yeah, Carnegie's later life is a fascinating counterpoint. He became this huge advocate for international peace. He spent a lot of his own money and used his considerable influence lobbying for things like arbitration treaties.
Like the Anglo-American treaty he pushed for.
Exactly. In 1887, he personally accompanied a group of British MPs to meet President Cleveland to argue for this treaty. That's using immense wealth and access, not just to protect your own bottom line, but to try and shape global policy towards, well, a perceived public good.
A very different use of power than, say, securing oil contracts or fighting climate science. It seems the choice is whether to use power to exempt yourself from rules or to try and change the rules for everyone.
Which leads us directly into what happens when these powerful, often opaque empires face real crisis or scandal, when the facade cracks.
Section 3. When empires fall. And the Sackler dynasty story with Purdue Pharma and OxyContin is just devastating.
It really is. And the sources make it clear this wasn't an accident. Purdue knew internally that OxyContin was being abused early on.
They were tracking prescription data.
Yes.
Yes.
As early as 1998, they saw that over 12% of prescriptions were being written off schedule more frequently than the recommended every 8 or 12 hours, which is a huge red flag for misuse and addiction.
12% in 98. And did that number grow?
It surged. By 2001, it was over 20%. 20% of scripts showed signs of potential abuse. They had the data. They saw the pattern.
And the reaction from the top, from Richard Sackler?
According to the sources, it was denial and damage control. Worrying about negative press, saying things like, I hate this, this will feed on itself, and internally sort of questioning whether the abusers were just people who would steal other opioids anyway, trying to deflect blame.
Even when their own sales reps were reporting horrifying stories.
Even then, reps reported meeting mothers who told them directly OxyContin sales were at the expense of dead children. The human cost was being reported straight up the chain, but the focus remained on sales and protecting the brand.
And the sales were immense. About $35 billion over the years from OxyContin alone.
Astronomical.
Yeah.
But then the lawsuits hit, and the legal bills became overwhelming for Purdue Pharma, the company.
To the point where the company itself was nearly bankrupt.
Right. By the time they filed for bankruptcy, Purdue had maybe only $500 million left in cash. The legal costs had drained the corporate entity. But, and this is crucial, the Sackler family had already extracted billions from the company over the years. Their personal fortunes remained largely separate and protected.
And this is where they used the bankruptcy process itself in a really controversial way, wasn't it? The third-party release.
Yes, this is a critical piece of the puzzle about how wealth protects itself. We need to understand this maneuver.
Explain it for us. What is a third-party release in bankruptcy?
Okay, so normally, bankruptcy is about the company that's in debt, in this case, Purdue Pharma. It reorganizes the company's debts. It doesn't usually affect the personal liability of the owners or executives, especially if they weren't debtors themselves.
So the Sacklers weren't personally bankrupt?
No, but they used their leverage, basically, the money they were willing to contribute to the bankruptcy settlement for Purdue's creditors to demand something extraordinary in return.
Which was?
They demanded that the bankruptcy judge grant them, the Sackler family members, personally, a release from all current and future civil lawsuits related to OxyContin, a third-party release, immunity.
So they used the company's bankruptcy to buy themselves personal freedom from being sued over the opioid crisis.
That's essentially what happened. Despite many states wanting to continue lawsuits directly against the family, the bankruptcy deal, including this release, offered a way to shut down potentially endless litigation against them personally, shielding their billions in exchange for contributing to the settlement fund. It's an extreme example of using the legal system to insulate personal wealth from corporate consequences.
Just staggering. Let's switch gears to Silicon Valley. Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes, another story of deception, but maybe more focused on dodging rules from the start.
Yes, the Theranos case is fascinating because the deception was baked in early, specifically designed to avoid regulatory scrutiny that Holmes knew would expose the flaws in her technology.
How did she try to do that? What was the strategy?
The sources call it creative and sneaky. Her core argument was that Theranos's blood testing devices, the Edison machines, weren't actually diagnostic devices themselves.
What were they then, according to her?
She claimed they were just dumb sample processors, like a fax machine sending data or a scanner. The real testing, she argued, only happened back at their central lab in Palo Alto.
And why did that distinction matter?
Because if the devices were just dumb terminals, they wouldn't need individual certification from the FDA or CMS Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, only the central lab would need certification. It was a loophole designed to let her put these unproven, often malfunctioning devices out into Walgreens and Safeway stores without the rigorous validation they should have had.
A way to bypass the gatekeepers?
Exactly. And when whistleblowers started raising alarms, like that Army officer who complained to the FDA, the immediate reaction was, again, suppression.
Trying to keep a lid on it.
Desperately. Holmes and her partner Sunny Balwani somehow got tipped off about that FDA complaint. Her focus instantly became trying to prevent the negative findings from the resulting inspections from getting out not just to the public or regulators, but even to her own investors, her board, and crucially, her retail partner, Walgreens. Control the information, control the narrative, hide the reality.
We see this pattern again, power used to suppress truth. And the sources on Jeffrey Epstein suggest his exploitation wasn't just individual acts, but involved a structured system.
Yes, the inquiry materials point towards a chillingly organized operation. It wasn't random. There appears to have been a system for recruitment.
How did that system work?
It involved paying existing victims sometimes around $200 for each new girl they brought into Epstein's circle. That implies a deliberate, repeatable process, a network effect, almost not just isolated predation.
And there was physical evidence of this organization.
Disturbingly, yes. Police discovered message pads, like logs, that listed girls' names, dates, phone numbers. And there were notes scribbled on them, things like, "I have 2 girls for him," signed by people known to be facilitators in his network, like Sarah Kellen. It suggests a level of routine, of business-like administration to the abuse.
Yet, despite all this, his connections seemed to shield him for a long time.
That's the other crucial part of the power dynamic. The sources note that even with these horrific activities swirling around him, Epstein still had enough clout, enough connections, to successfully intervene and help powerful people, like Alan Dershowitz in one instance mentioned, with their own unrelated problems, like recovering money.
A network of mutual protection among the elite.
It certainly looks that way. Influence and favors created a kind of shield, insulating him from accountability for years. The power derived from wealth and connections provided impunity.
Okay, let's look inside these empires for a moment. The sources offer a really sharp contrast in leadership styles, particularly around loyalty versus ruthlessness.
Yeah, you can put someone like Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, side by side with Jack Welch, who ran General Electric for years. Very different approaches.
Walton's approach.
Walton really emphasized treating his employees, his store workers, as associates. He set up profit sharing. He genuinely seemed to believe that building that sense of partnership and loyalty gave Walmart a competitive edge. He needed his people motivated.
And Jack Welch?
Welch represented almost the complete opposite philosophy, especially later in his tenure. He famously dismantled the idea of long-term corporate loyalty. GE was incredibly profitable, making $1.5 billion in net income one year. But Welch still initiated massive layoffs.
Why, if they were so profitable?
To make the company leaner, more efficient in the short term, and crucially, to drive up the stock price. He was famous for cutting the bottom 10% of managers each year. He basically signaled that employee loyalty was secondary, maybe even, as one source puts it, laughable, compared to shareholder value. It was a watershed moment that shifted corporate culture across America.
Ruthlessness as a strategy for shareholder return. But sometimes, leaders fail not because they're ruthless, but because they aren't ruthless enough, or perhaps aren't aware enough of the ruthlessness around them.
That seems to be the story with Pete Peterson, who co-founded the massive private equity firm Blackstone. But before that, he was at Lehman Brothers.
What happened there?
Peterson himself reflected later that he was maybe too intellectual, too focused on the big picture. His cerebral flights, he called them. He admitted being naive and too trusting.
Meaning
He completely missed the internal backstabbing, the Machiavellian internal politics going on around him at Lehman. While he was thinking big thoughts, others were maneuvering for power, and eventually they pushed him out. His lack of political savvy, his trust, proved fatal in that Shark Tank environment.
So it seems whether you're dealing with finance, tech, or pharma, sustained power at the top often requires either a willingness to be ruthless or at least a very keen awareness of the political games being played. Naivete is a huge liability.
So after looking at all this, the AI engines of inequality, the history of RG, the secrecy in global finance, the corporate cronyism, the devastating scandals, what's the big picture for you, the listener?
Well, it seems clear that while concentrating wealth isn't new, the modern tools, AI, high speed finance, global legal structures, have amplified the power of elites and maybe made it even harder to hold them accountable.
Yeah, the thread running through almost all these sources is the extraordinary lengths the powerful will go to protect themselves and their wealth. Using secrecy, attacking critics, manipulating regulations, using bankruptcy law itself as a shield.
We saw it with the fossil fuel industry trying to discredit science, HFT firms exploiting market structure, and maybe most starkly, the Sacklers using that third-party release to seek personal immunity from the fallout of the opioid crisis. There's a fundamental accountability deficit baked into the system.
Which brings us back to that point from Kai-Fu Lee, the idea that society is increasingly demanding that companies do more than just make profits, that they should serve a social purpose.
Right. So here's the final, maybe provocative question for you to think about. We've seen this deep-seated historical tendency for massive fortunes to insulate themselves using secrecy, political influence, legal loopholes, all the mechanisms we've discussed.
Given that reality, can this growing demand for corporate social responsibility actually change those entrenched systems? Can it really penetrate that armor of unaccountable wealth?
Or is it perhaps just surface level, maybe necessary PR, a kind of window dressing that looks good, but doesn't fundamentally alter the power dynamics until the next crisis inevitably rips the curtain back again?
Something to definitely mull over. Can purpose truly override power and profit in these structures?
A tough question indeed. We hope this deep dive has given you some frameworks for thinking about these hidden architectures of power that shape so much of our world. Thanks for joining us.